Hello everyone, this is Charlie from the Bloomingdale Public Library, and welcome to our second class discussing free office software called LibreOffice. Last week we started by looking at what LibreOffice was, discussed how to install it on your computer, and then went into detail in the word processing application in the suite called Writer. This week we will continue with LibreOffice and discuss the slideshow making application called Impress. So if you needed to get things installed on your computer or wanted to know a little bit more about the background of LibreOffice, I recommend looking at our class from last week. It should still be up on our YouTube channel. So for this week, I'm going to assume you have everything installed and know the basics of what we're discussing. And we're going to go ahead and discuss how to go about getting started with LibreOffice Impress. So I'm going to get out of the slideshow here. And there's a couple ways we can go about opening LibreOffice Writer. The first thing we can do is simply double click on our LibreOffice icon on the desktop. It'll take us to our LibreOffice home screen here. And from here, we can see all the other applications in the suite, but we want Impress presentation. We click on that, and that will take us to this screen. I'm going to go ahead and close this all for now. We'll discuss it later. A few other things we can do are create a custom LibreOffice Impress shortcut. And to do that in Microsoft Windows, what we do is open the Start menu here, go to the LibreOffice folder, and again you can see all the applications contained within the LibreOffice suite. If you simply just click and drag onto the desktop, you can create a shortcut that goes directly to LibreOffice Impress, and you don't have to go to that home screen. As you can see, I already made one earlier, so now we have a second one. If we double click, you see it takes us directly to LibreOffice Impress. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and close things up for now. And the other way we can go about opening LibreOffice Impress is to double click on one of the files. LibreOffice Impress files have an extension of ODP. But if you have other software on your computer capable of opening slideshows, you might get some windows that ask you which application you want to open with. So this opened just fine, but LibreOffice Impress is just like LibreOffice Writer in that it can open Microsoft Suite applications. And so a Microsoft PowerPoint presentation has an extension of PPTX. So if I double click on this guy, you see it opens in Office by default and gives us a window asking us, how we want to open it. I'm going to click No, X out of that. If you needed to open a PowerPoint presentation on your computer and it doesn't open by default, what you can do is right click on it, go down to Open With, and select LibreOffice Impress. And then it will open in LibreOffice Impress. One note, although you can open the PowerPoint presentations in LibreOffice and vice versa, sometimes things don't quite translate over quite right, so formatting and styling might see a little bit of a change. Just be aware of that, and there's always ways to go about editing things to make things look nice if something didn't quite translate over the way you expected. But those are the ways we go about opening an Impress file for LibreOffice. Next, we're going to discuss the interface. So to take a look at the LibreOffice Impress interface, let's go ahead and open it up again. If it's the first time in the day opening LibreOffice Impress, you're going to get a little tip of the day window. You can toggle that on and off if you like. And then after that, you will see this window, which is a template selection window. So if you scroll down a bit, you see you have got quite a few options here. And this is just a way of pre-formatting and pre-styling your slideshow. If you don't want to have a look at this every time you open up LibreOffice Impress, you can toggle it off in the lower left corner here. You can also import slideshows if you have a template created, or if you want to go online, there's more available templates to be found. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this for now. So we start with a fresh new slide. So if you were with us last week, you'll notice that everything looks kind of similar, but not quite, to LibreOffice Writer. Again, at the top, we've got the menus, and the next bunch of commands are, again, the standard toolbar for LibreOffice Impress. And then below that, we've got the drawing tools. Unlike how it was in LibreOffice Writer, where every time you selected something different, like an image or text, this bar is going to just stay there. And instead, what you'll see is things change in the sidebar, which is located on the right here. We'll see that in action when we get started with text boxes. So if you wanted to get a little bit more real estate, you can toggle the draw functions on and off by clicking on this guy here. If you wanted to pull up more toolbars to be visible by default, just like before, you can go to View, Toolbars, and pull up more toolbars if you like. So if you wanted Align Object toolbar, you see that it pops up right here. All toolbars are dockable, so you can see what happens when I pull that up to the drawing toolbar. It kind of docks in there. If you right click on one of the functions, click Undock Toolbar, we can get it back off. Also, like before, if we don't have a full window, we see the extended arrows on the right side, and you can click on those to see what doesn't fit and select the functions that way. I'm going to re-maximize the toolbar. Also, like before, if you prefer a tabbed interface to look more like the Microsoft Office suite, that's also something you can do by clicking on View, User Interface, Tabbed. And now you've got File, Home, Insert, Layout, etc. tabs at your disposal. To get out of that, we'll click on the bars, User Interface, and go back to the standard toolbar. On the right side, we have our slide navigation. We'll discuss that once we have a few more slides to look at. And at the bottom, again, we have the status bar where you can adjust the zoom and see a couple other statistics about our document. So after you open Impress from scratch, you close the tip of the day, select a template or don't, you're going to wind up with a title slide like this. And it has two text boxes, one on top of the other. You'll also notice on the right side, in the side panel, it'll say Properties, and it says Slide, shows some slide properties, and then the Layout selector. We'll have a look at that a little bit later. So to get looking at text boxes, I'm just going to go ahead and click on the placeholder text in this top text box. And you'll notice when I do, I get a flashing cursor so we can start typing and enter our own text. You also notice on the right, in the side panel where it says Properties, it now has a whole bunch of functions that we should be very familiar with for manipulating text. So we've got the font styling, we've got the paragraph formatting, etc. That all works the same way it did before, but just to demonstrate, I'll go ahead and highlight some text, choose a different font, choose a different size, set it to bold, change the alignment, etc. So again, it should all be very familiar, and I'm not going to go over it more in any more length. I'm going to go ahead and undo, get everything back to the way it was. If I click on the border of the text box, You'll see we get little square nodes around the sides and on the corners. Those work just like they did for manipulating an image in Writer. So if I click on any of the squares, I'll be able to change the height or width, or with a corner node you can choose to change them both at the same time. The undo button is your friend, so we'll go ahead and undo that. Also, you notice as I roll over the text box, I have a cursor with 4 arrows. When you see that, you can click and drag the text box to wherever you like. Again, I'm going to go ahead and undo that. If I click on the border, the white squares turn into red circles. And you'll notice when I roll over the circles on the corners, I get a little rotational arrow. And if I click and drag on it, I can rotate the text. I'm going to click undo again. We're rotating about this little red circle in the middle. If I click and drag that little red circle, again it's got like a crosshair around it so you know it's special. I'm going to click and drag on one of our corner nodes again, and you see we're still rotating about that same node. It just takes us in a little bit of a different direction. So I'll go ahead and get things centered again. So taking a look at more of our properties on the side here, we've got area. And right now it's set to none by default. If I choose a color, you see we get a nice light blue background on our text box. And we get a drop-down menu here where we can choose another color. And there's a few other options too. We'll have a look at Bitmap though. If I choose Bitmap, it means we can set an image to the background of the text box. So you click Import, navigate to your image, select Open, and now we have an image in the background of our text box. This isn't a very good image because it kind of blends in with the title, but there's things you can do to make it pop out a little bit more, like, say, adjust the transparency. So shadowing will add a doubled image, and you can choose how that looks and the angle and such. I'm not going to look at that one right now, but we're going to have a look at line. What line is basically a framing border. So I'm going to choose just a continuous line here, and you see once again we get a colored border around our text box. You can choose a different color. We'll choose red. It's a little hard to see, so I'm going to adjust the width here to 6. Now you can see what we did there. So that's how you would adjust the fill and the line of a text box. At the bottom here we have position and size, and that's just a way of changing the position and size of your text box like we did before, except you can use the numbers or the up and down keys to adjust things a little more differently. The same with rotation. So we had a look at text boxes. Now let's have a look at placeholders. Placeholder box is basically like a text box, except it can become one of many different things. To do that, let's go ahead and create a new slide. So in the standard toolbar, all the way on the far right, there's a function for new slide. Let's just go ahead and click on that. By default, it takes us to a slide that looks like this, which is a title and content slide. So at the top we have a text box just like we did before for adding a title to our slide, and it works just the same. Below that we have a placeholder box. You see it says click to add text, but there's also some icons in the middle for adding a table, image, and a few other things. Let's go ahead and click on the placeholder text and start typing. Basically, once you start typing, you've turned the placeholder into a text box. By default, it will start you off with a bulleted list, but that's a pretty good way of organizing content for a slideshow. If it's not what you like, you can just go ahead and highlight it, toggle bulleted list off, and we're back to just regular text. I'm going to go ahead and delete that text. And in the middle, let's go ahead and have a look at one of these other options. We'll do Insert Image. When you click Insert Image, just like it did in Writer, it will pull up a window for you to search for your file. Just select it, Click open, and it'll insert the image into your slide. So we've got a lot of properties that show up on the right. We'll have a look at some of those in a bit. Otherwise, on the slide itself, it looks very familiar to our text box. We've got the white square nodes all around the edges. If you click on the image itself while you've got the 4-arrowed cursor, you can click and move the image wherever you like. Click and drag on the squares to resize it, either height and width or both, depending if you're using one of the sides or the corner nodes. The undo button works just like it did before. If you click on the borders are white so you can't see them so well, but when you do, you get the rotation nodes, and they also work like they did before. Just click and drag on one of the corners to start rotating about the pivot point. Click and drag on the pivot point to rotate about it outside of the image there. Again, undo button is your friend. And let's have a look at some of these properties here. The first one is character properties. The second is the paragraph properties. We've already looked at those extensively. Area we had a look at briefly with the text boxes, and that acts the same as it did before. Go ahead and select any one of our options here. Choose color. We get in color drop-down menu. We've got a transparency bar to change the look of things a little bit. Glow will add a fuzzy border to the outside. You can add a transparency to that as well. Shadow, if you enable that, basically get a secondary image. As you increase the distance, it becomes a bit more pronounced. You can also change the angle for a different effect. You can change the color and transparency on that as well. Transparency works a bit better if you have a background image. With just a white background, it really doesn't look like much. If you click on the image properties, you can adjust the brightness, contrast, and color levels. Soft edge kind of eats away at the insides of the borders and makes them soft and fuzzy. Line works like it did before by adding a border, which is white by default. Add a little bit of width and color, and it becomes pretty clear with what we got there. And position and size also works like it did before, where we can adjust things with the numbers, like the rotation and the position. Let's go ahead and create another slide. So on the standard toolbar on the right side, go ahead and click on New Slide. And once again, we've got a title and content slide. It should look just like we had before. This time, in our placeholder, let's go ahead and click on Insert Table. When we do that, we have a window that pops up. It shows us columns and rows. We go ahead and choose the dimensions, either with the arrows, or you can type in what you want. I'm going to put in 6 by 6. After you choose your dimensions, hit OK, and you should have a table. If you see on the right side, once again, we've got all of our standard styling and formatting tools, as well as table design options in the bottom right. And then on the bottom, we now have a table toolbar with some more functions that we can use. So looking at the slide itself, let's go ahead, click and drag on that bottom node to stretch things out a bit. We can change the dimensions just like we did with the text box and the images, but I don't believe we can rotate. That's okay, you rarely want to rotate your table anyway. So with our bigger cells, let's look at the table design. You can go ahead and just click, and you see lots of different things happening. It's kind of weird though, because with the table selected, there's a blue hue to indicate that the table is selected, kind of covering everything. So if I were to choose, let's say, this green option, and then click away from the table, you now see the actual colors that we're working with, and it's not that blue color that, again, indicates that the table is selected. Below the table design options, we have some more checkboxes. So all this does is kind of darken the rows to indicate header rows, total rows, banding, etc. So I'm going to leave the header row checkbox checked, and let's do the banded rows as well. I like the look of that. And so with our scheme all selected, we can have a look at our table toolbar. The first option is to create a new table, which, you can go ahead and choose your dimensions with the grid, but then it puts another table on top of what we already got. Let's go ahead and undo that. I'm going to select the table again. Next option is for borders. This is the borders for each cell. Go ahead and choose just a random old thing. The border colors, let's choose red. Now you can see things are happening. The next option is just to choose which borders are selected and which aren't. So this could be useful for indicating a totals row or something like that. Otherwise, all the borders are created by default. The next option is the colors for the cells themselves. So if you want to override what you've already got, let's go ahead and just choose one of the cells at random here. So with the cursor in this second row, second column cell, let's go ahead and choose color, and then choose, again, red. And you can see we can go ahead and change the appearance of the cells. You can even, if you go to Bitmap, choose a picture. So there's a whole bunch of images already in there by default, but if you've added an image earlier, those will appear at the bottom. And as you see, we now have our car in the background of one of those cells. To add content to cells, you just click in the cell and start typing. And you can style and format those just like you would in an ordinary text box. In fact, the table is technically put inside a text box. We have some other options if we wanted to merge cells. You can go ahead and just click and drag to select cells, and then going right on our toolbar here, we see merge cells. Now everything is combined into a single cell. If we wanted to split them, go ahead, put the cursor in the cell, click split cells, and you have an option as to how you split it into how many cells, and horizontally or vertically. You can't do both at the same time though. So we wanted to do, say, 4, split it vertically. That's what we wind up with. There's a few other options as well for adding and moving rows around, as well as adjusting the alignment within the cells. So we went over adding text, images, and tables with a placeholder box. We didn't get to charts, video, and audio, but there's a lot more I'd like to cover, so we're going to move on. In the standard toolbar, if we go all the way over to the right side, again, where we've got new slide, we also have a little down arrow next to it. If you click on that down arrow, we see the various layouts that we see in the lower right hand corner when we have the slide properties open. If you pick any one of these, it will create a new slide with that layout. So if we choose title with 6 content, we wind up with a slide like this. It's quite a bit more complicated than we're used to seeing, but everything acts the way that it did originally. So the top box is still just a text box, and these 6 boxes are all placeholders. So we can click here and add some text. We can insert a table in this guy here. We can add an image in this guy over here. And you'll notice for the image it did resize it appropriately. So if we make sure nothing is selected, so click outside of the slide here, that'll bring the slide properties back up in the right side panel over here. And I'm going to have a look at some of these options. The first one is format. it starts at screen 16 by 9, but you can change it to anything you like for a different size page if you were planning on printing it out. Or if you knew you had a unusually shaped screen, you can go ahead and set the dimensions to whatever you think you need. I'm going to put it back to 16 by 9. Orientation, it's just what it sounds like, landscape or portrait. I'm going to set it back to landscape. Background, you can set the background to a color if you like. Or you can even insert an image. So, yeah, that looks a bit busy, so I'm going to go ahead and undo that. I just wanted to show that we can do it. Woo! And I'm going to set the background back to none. So I'm going to talk about the master slide just a bit in a little while. But we notice we've got the layouts here at the bottom too. And as we select these, you'll notice things move around a bit. So ideally you would set the layout before you start adding content, but you can do it afterwards as well and see what you wind up with. At the same time, you can also do your own adjustments, even with the layout already created. So this is what we started off with, the title with 6 content. So let's say we wanted to move things around and add our own. We can go ahead and select that placeholder and delete it. Select this placeholder and delete it. Select this placeholder. Drag it around a bit. Maybe add some big text. And we can even insert our own stuff. So if we go to the insert menu at the top, have a look at that. You see we have all the options that we had with the placeholder, as well as a few that we didn't get around to. So we've got the image, we've got the table, we've got the text box, and we have the other things as well, like charts, shapes, and media, which again we're not going to cover in this class today. So let's say we want to insert another image. Just click on image, insert it like we did before. However, since we don't have a placeholder, it's going to just plop it down wherever. Actually, in that case, I put it in the text box by accident. Let's make sure we've got nothing selected. Insert, image. Select another car. And there we go. This time we did not have anything selected and we didn't have a placeholder. So it just put it in full size. That's okay because we know how to resize images. Shrink it down, move it over. And that's how we would create our own slide layout. So now that we know how to create a whole bunch of slides, let's talk about the Slide Navigator. You probably noticed as we were making edits and adding slides, those changes were reflected over here on the left side of the screen. And this is the Slide Navigator. As its name implies, it's mostly for navigating back and forth between your slides. So simply by clicking on a slide, you can go back and do some editing. When you make a change, the change is reflected almost instantly in the thumbnail. So again, if you want to insert a background, again in a second it pops up. So besides navigating and seeing our changes, we can also use the Slide Navigator to do a few other things. If you click and drag on a slide, you can move it to somewhere else in your slideshow. If you click and drag, you can select multiple slides, or you can click and then hold down Control and use that to select your slides if they're non-contiguous, and still drag them around and change the order. If you right-click on a slide, we get a menu with a whole bunch of other options. We can cut, which does exactly what you'd expect. You can right-click, paste. You can duplicate the slide. So if you create a slide and you want to maintain that format for the rest of your slideshow, you can just keep duplicating slides. You can hide a slide by right-clicking and select Hide Slide. And what that will do is keep the slide in the slideshow, but when you go to play the slideshow, it will skip it. Right-click, Show Slide, and it comes back. You can also right-click and go to Properties, and that'll show us some more slide properties, backgrounds, transparencies. You can right-click on pretty much anything we've discussed so far to get a pop-up window with more properties and options. So for text boxes, tables, images, if you right-click on it, you'll get more options than you see typically in the side panel. Besides duplicating slides, another way you can make changes to your slides that will be persistent throughout the slideshow is editing the master slide. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, it's pretty easy to mess up your slideshow, and the master slide functionality is not exactly intuitive, so I'm only going to use it to add a background and a slide number. So, in the standard toolbar, right in the middle where it says master slide, let's click on master slide. That's when we get an image like this. This is basically the template for all the slides in our slideshow. You can have multiple master slides, but we're not going to get into anything like that right now. You also see where it'll put the dates, the times, footers, numbers, everything like that. So again, it's kind of a template for all the slides in our slideshow. To add a background that'll show up in the rest of our slides, you can go to Slide, Set Background Image, and we'll go ahead and choose one of our cars. Click Open. Now we have a car in the background of our slideshow. To add a slide number, we go to Insert, and then not slide number, but header and footer. We click on that. We see a checkbox for slide number. We go ahead and click that. Apply to all. To get out of editing the master slide, we again go to the standard toolbar, and next to the master slide where it says Display Views, go ahead and click on that. And in the top left corner where it says Edit Modes, choose Normal. And now we are back to editing our slides as normal. And you'll notice that the image appears in the background of all of our slides, except for slide 5 because we added a background previously. If we choose None, that gets that blue color out of the way, and we can see our background image again. You'll also notice in the lower right hand corner we have the numbers of our slides, and that number will be correct no matter what. So if we were to click and drag slide 6 over to slide 2, you see the numbers stay correct. One more topic I'd like to discuss before demonstrating how to actually play a slideshow is transitions. Transitions are animations that play from one slide to the next. There is also the option to throw in some sound, though there aren't many situations where it would make sense, but I'll show you how to do it anyway. So to add a transition to a slide, you go all the way to the right side of the screen, even past the properties where we have a couple icons on the right side of the screen here. I didn't discuss any of these, and I'm not going to, besides the properties which we've already discussed, and then the slide transition. So when you click on slide transition, our side panel gives us the slide transition panel. You can see there's a whole bunch of options as far as slide transitions go. Let's go ahead and click on Wipe. When you click on any of the transitions, it will give you a preview. If I click on Wheel, we get a different effect. So all these transitions have a couple of modifications you can do to them. So when we go to Modify Transition, we start off with clockwise, 1 spoke. If I choose clockwise, 8 spokes, you see we get a little bit of a different effect on the transition. If we go to Wipe, we can go top to bottom, left to right, etc. Next option is duration. By default, the transitions are all 2 seconds, but if we set it to, say, 5 seconds, you see it transitions much more slowly. If we wanted to do something a little quicker, like 0.5 seconds, much more quickly. I'm going to set it back to 2 seconds. And then we'll have a look at the next option, which is sound. By default, there's no sound. I recommend leaving it that way, but just to show you why, we'll go ahead and click on the cow sound. That is absolutely terrible. I'm going to try the congas. Not quite as offensive, but still quite terrible. And we'll finish with the gong. Truly painful. Be aware, whatever sound you choose, if you shorten the duration, it's going to cut off. I'm going to go back and set this to no sound. If you wanted to test them out, feel free. But I think we've heard enough for now. Next option is advancing the slide. By default, it will advance on mouse click. There's a few other ways to advance the slide as well, but you can also set it to transition automatically. So if you set automatically, what will happen is the slide will be displayed for a certain amount of time and then automatically go to the next. So by default, it's 1 second, but that's probably not long enough for most purposes, even if there's no text. So you can bump that up to something like 5 or 10 seconds. It'd be useful if you were to have some sort of display before your presentation, so it would automatically go back and forth between maybe slides of locations or maybe photos of people. I've also seen it used for digital signing. So if you have a sign up in your building, you can play a slideshow and have it automatically change itself after a certain amount of time. Whatever transition you choose, I'd recommend clicking Apply Transition to All Slides. That way, your transitions will all be consistent. If you use different transitions for all of your slides, it just kind of feels amateurish and weird. It's like something you would do in junior high school. So I'd recommend being consistent or leaving transitions out altogether. So if you click Apply Transition to All Slides, you see over on the far left side, we now have a star with little lines showing that there's a transition attached to all of our slides. Okay, so now it's time to play our slideshow. To play your slideshow, go to the standard toolbar. About halfway across, we see one that says Start from First Slide. Go ahead and click on that. You can also press F5. And when we do, it takes us to our first slide. To advance the slides, all you need to do is left click, and it will take us to the next slide. You can also use the down and right arrows, or you can use the left and up arrows to go backwards. When you go backwards, you'll notice that there is no transition. One other thing you can do is right click, and that'll bring up a menu here. And you can click on next slide, but it looks kind of tacky. I wouldn't do that. This menu is useful, however, for jumping to a slide. If you finish your slideshow and someone wanted to go back and see a specific slide, you can use right click, go to slide, and choose whatever slide you want to jump to. You also have the option to use your mouse pointer as a pen. So if, I don't know, if your slideshow had some math to perform or you needed to draw around a map or something, you can go ahead and click mouse pointer as a pen. And now when you click and drag, you can make some scribbles. If you right click, choose change pen color, we can use another color. Right click, pen width, you have some options for a different size pen. And when you're all done making a mess, you can right click and select erase all ink, and it will give us a clean slate. One other thing you can do is right click and end your show, or to end the show you can use the escape key. And that'll take us back to the editing screen. Just to demonstrate, one other thing we can do is the automatic advanced slide. We'll leave it at 1 second. And if you were going to do a display to be left alone for like an anniversary or a birthday party, you know, with pictures from the past, you can go ahead and click on Slideshow settings, and then make sure to choose loop and repeat after, so that way you can just leave your display alone and it will advance the slides itself. That's something you would also use if you were to be using the slideshow as digital signage. If you wanted to repeat versus reach the end and get a black screen, you'd want this loop and repeat after. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to make sure to apply the transition to all slides. I'm going to go back up to the standard toolbar and click Start from First Slide. And when I do, you see after 1 second, the slides advance themselves. And once we get to the last slide, it goes right back to the first. I'm going to hit Escape to get out of that. And that's all I had for today. So I appreciate you guys viewing. If you wanted to learn more, I would recommend using either YouTube tutorials. Simply go to YouTube and do a search for LibreOffice Impress, or you can check out the LibreOffice documentation. I have links to those in the first class I did with LibreOffice Writer. Unfortunately, there isn't any material in lynda.com like I usually direct people after my classes, because Microsoft probably didn't want a competitor on their site, especially a free one. So again, I thank you for viewing, and I hope you all have a good day.